Hello and welcome to today's Sports Psychology Screencast. The focus is Vealey's model of sports confidence. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what this model of sports confidence proposes, it basically says or is a sequential or hierarchical process that will explain how confidence impacts sports performance. So to put that into a little bit of perspective for you, when I say hierarchical and sequential, what that means is the model has three key factors at the top of it. And then these three factors will interact to then directly influence other parts of the model. So if you can see it into here, what I'm talking about here is we have three things at the top. Trait sports confidence, we'll have a look at in a minute. The sporting context, e.g. the skill that you're going to perform, and the competitive orientation, how competitive someone is. Those three things will interact and will then directly impact state sports confidence, which will then directly impact behavioural response, which will then directly impact subjective perceptions of outcomes. And as a result of that, they will then either increase or decrease competitive orientation and trait sports confidence. So as you can see here, you are required to talk about the process of how different factors will affect how confidently someone performs, and as a result of how confident they perform, how well they perform. So that's what we have to be able to do. As with any model in sports psychology, we have certain things we have to do first and foremost. Firstly, we have to define each key term or translate each key term on this model. Secondly, we have to talk about the relationship using the arrows, explaining how they impact something else within the model until we get to this idea on how performance is affected. So, on to here then. Key terminology we need to do to start with for the first part of this model is we need to have an understanding of what the highlighted terms are. These are terms on the specification, which means they could be asked for as a definition on their own. So it's important we know what these are. Usually they'll be part of a model. So first up then, trait sports confidence. Now you will remember from earlier in the course, whenever we talk about trait in sports psychology, we're talking about something that's innate, that's stable, enduring, consistent, those key things. Now when it comes to confidence, we will know from previous lesson that confidence refers to our self-belief. Okay, so what we have to do for trait sports confidence then is it refers to innate, stable and enduring self-belief in sport. For example, what does this mean with regard to confidence then? It means that you will be confident in a range of sports. So for example, it might be badminton and football. That's what trait sports confidence is saying, that your sports confidence is innate, but it's also stable and enduring, consistent across different sporting activities. Competitive orientation then basically refers to when you're in a competitive situation, your willingness to take a risk and be competitive. So it refers to the willingness to take a risk. So if you put that into the example which we're going to use today, which is a football penalty, if you were willing to take a risk with a penalty, you would volunteer yourself to take that penalty. So that would be our example there. And finally, we've got state sports confidence. So state sports confidence refers to, as you'll remember from earlier in the course, we looked at state anxiety. Whenever you see the word state, it's talking about situation specific. So in this case, we're talking about the situation specific self-belief in sport. So in this case, we're looking at that refers to situation specific self-belief in sport. For example, taking a penalty. Okay, so how much belief you have when you have a situational aspect like a penalty, a conversion in rugby, whatever that might be. Okay, so that's that. There are key terms. Now, once we have these understood, we can then start the process of interpreting them all. Okay, so now what we can do is have a go at actually interpreting and applying the model. So rather than do the whole model in one go, what I'm going to do is split the model into two halves so that we can see exactly the process of interpreting it, followed by how you would write it in an exam response. So what I'm going to say to people here, I think it would be a very good idea if you just listened until I have completed the interpretation of the key components on the boxes here. Firstly, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once I've done that, I'm going to talk to you how you interpret those or decode those. And then I'm going to put them into an exam answer or how you'd respond in continuous prose down to here. So what I suggest you do is listen to the process first and then watch how I will put it into an exam question and then make your notes off there. Okay, so if I said from here, first up then, in order to understand Vealey's model of sports confidence, before we even start looking at the technical terms within the model, we have to firstly give the model a sporting context. So what we're going to do is use sporting context needs to be described as the skill to be performed. In this case, we're going to use e.g. taking a penalty. Now, if I said to you on here, every part of this model needs to be translated into a description, and if you could exemplify it with a sporting example, it really helps your learning and understanding of it. So what I'm going to do first up on this bit is we're just going to, as we looked on the previous page, make sure we can define each key term. So once we've got a sporting context, the next two things we have to talk about, the next level down, are trait, sports confidence, and competitive orientation. So trait, sports confidence, remember, refers to that innate, stable and enduring, consistent confidence across situations. So what we've got in here, so I've put into here innate, stable and enduring, self-belief, because I've got to translate confidence into self-belief in sport. For example, confident in a wide range of sports. Now, next thing across onto here, next level down, or across, sorry, we've got competitive orientation. And this, remember, refers to our willingness to take a risk. For example, volunteering to take a penalty. So now we've defined each term with an example, define. Now what we need to do is define our fourth term, which is state sports confidence. So hopefully from the previous slide, you'll remember that state sports confidence refers to the situation-specific self-belief in sport. So that's our definition, for example, how confident you are when taking a penalty. Okay, so very, very quickly, if I could just get your attention at this point. So far, we have now looked at defining all the black terms that will be on the model. You would get to see all of the things in the boxes and the arrows, they would all be on there, but the red and the green would not be there. So what we've looked at is the process of being able to decode, I suppose, or translate those key terms, but that is not enough. So the first thing we have to do is once you've done this, you would not be annotating a model in an exam question, okay? I have annotated it here so you can see the sequential process of understanding and interpreting the model. In an exam answer, you would have to start off by defining all of the key terms on the top four boxes within the model. So very quickly, just as what we've done before, sporting context, as I said before, skill to be performed, penalty. Then we've got to define trait, sports confidence. Give an example. Then we've got to define competitive orientation. Then we've got to define and give an example of state sports confidence. So our first four key terms are like this, and this is the bit. Okay, that just requires you to describe or translate each of those terms. But to understand the model, we've got to then start to see how we can apply and talk about the relationships between the key terms on the model. So ultimately, what we are saying here is as follows. If you look at this model, what it's saying is that state sports confidence, or situation-specific confidence when taking a penalty, is directly influenced by the trait sports confidence we have alongside our competitive orientation when taking a penalty. So that is what this model is saying so far. So in order to get the application of this model, we then need to be able to say the following. State sports confidence is directly influenced by trait sports confidence and competitive orientation. And I'll put in bracket here, I missed the bracket off there, and the sporting context, which in this case was taking a penalty. So that just shows you that you're not just defining the terms, but you're explaining that the top three things interact and directly impact or influence the bottom thing, which is state sports confidence so far. Now, to really show you understand it, you should then give a positive application of what you've seen so far. So if we put this into a positive application, if I just explain this to you before I drop it down, what this means is if you have high trait sports confidence, your innate, stable and enduring, consistent confidence across situations is high, alongside the fact that you are someone who has high competitive orientation, you're willing to take a risk. If those two things align, that will mean that you're more likely, as you can see the arrows going down here, to have a high state sports confidence. So if I put that into an answer on here, this would then be how I wrote that into continuous prose. So if trait sports confidence and competitive orientation are high, state sports confidence is more likely to be high. So then straight away, we've not only translated each of the terms on the model, we've then talked about the relationship between the top three and then how it impacts the state sports confidence. And then we've given a positive best fit application if all of this is great. We've got high trait sports confidence, high competitive orientation, it's more likely we'd have high state sports confidence. So ultimately, that is how you would go through the process of writing an exam answer on the first part of Vealey's model of sports confidence. So that's our first section complete. Now what we need to do is pick up on the second part. So now we've looked at how the top 3 factors interact, directly influence state sports confidence. We now need to talk about how state sports confidence will directly influence our behavioural response. So first things first then, state sports confidence, as we know, is that situation-specific form of confidence, okay, or self-belief, sorry. So in that case, what we've got there then is our self-belief when taking a situation-specific action, such as a penalty. Now from there, if we have high state sports confidence, or low state sports confidence, that will then directly influence our behavioural response. So our behavioural response in this case, as you can see onto here, this basically refers to how well the skill is performed. For example, if we looked at this from the aspect of a penalty, e.g. the penalty is taken well. The penalty is taken with good technique. So once we've talked about this, that would make sense, wouldn't it? You've got high situation-specific confidence when you're taking a penalty. That will influence how well you perform the skill, so how well it's taken, the technique within it. And then as a result of that, it will directly influence then our subjective perceptions of outcome. Now, all this means is, if you take your penalty well, after that, you will have an outcome. That outcome will either be a successful penalty or an unsuccessful penalty. And you will interpret whether you think it's a successful penalty or an unsuccessful penalty. So if we put it down to here, it's the interpretation of success. Now, in things like penalties, which are relatively objective, well, they are objective because you can see factually what happens, that you're either going to score or miss. So in this case, we're going to have a look at this. For example, you score a penalty. Now, as you can see on the model, the next thing we have to be able to do is we have to have a talk about the impact of our interpretation of success or our subjective perceptions of outcome on trait sports confidence and competitive orientation. So that is basically referred to analysing the subjective outcome. So in this case then, if we score a penalty, we have a positive subjective outcome. This will then directly increase our trait sports confidence and competitive orientation, because you can see on here the arrows go back up to there. I'm sure you'll be able to understand this. What does that mean? So in future, you will have a higher level of innate, stable, enduring, consistent confidence across situations, and also you might be more willing to take a risk. Your competitive orientation increases. On the flip side to that, you could also have a negative subjective outcome, which would happen when you miss the penalty. So the effects of a negative perception of our outcome would be referring to this idea of decreasing our trait sports confidence and competitive orientation. Again, let's see this in terms of how we would write it. So what we have to do then, if we pick up where we finished on the last paragraph, we would then go down into here. State sports confidence directly influences our behavioural response. We then need to explain what behavioural response is and give an example. So it refers to how well the skill is performed. And then, for example, in this case, the penalty is well taken. Now what we can do is just do a little relationship between these with a positive application. So we could say, well, if our state sports confidence is high, it's more likely that our behavioural response will be effective, or we will perform the skill well, e.g. the penalty will be scored. So I've just put here just a little bit of an application of what you've just said. We followed the arrows and now we're applying it. State sports confidence is high, behavioural response will be high, and the skill will be performed well. Okay, now from here, you don't have to talk about the direct influence here, but obviously how well you perform the skill will then dictate your subjective perception of outcome. Remember, you'll get these black terms in the exam. They'll be on the model on the sheet. So we then say, what do we need to know about subjective perceptions of outcome? We need to know that this refers to the interpretation of success, e.g. the penalty is scored, you could say, or missed, and then we need to do a positive and negative application to show that we understand how to analyse the subjective outcome or subjective perceptions of outcome being positive or negative. So what do we do? We're going to go this way first, just to show what this means. If subjective outcome is positive, trait sports confidence and competitive orientation increase, whereas in the future, whereas if the subjective outcome is negative, we miss the penalty, This will lead to a decreased trait sports confidence and competitive orientation. Next time a penalty comes up, we think, right, our confidence across different sports might be knocked by it, and next time a penalty comes up, competitive orientation or willingness to take a risk probably won't offer to take one. So that's kind of how it works. Ultimately, your notes should consist of you could do what you like, but you have to have these boxes really to show how you would write your answer in an exam response. Okay, so 2 things really. You've had part 1 of the model, part 2 of the model. Make sure you have got notes that are questioned. Every single note needs to have a question. What does a term mean? What's the relationship between them? Okay, thank you.